We're not ready to start yet. We're waiting for one more member to show up. Thank you, Mr. Buscaino, for being on time. Economic Development, we're still meeting, Madam Clerk, so I'm waiting on another member. Can you find out where Mr. Alfaro and Mr. Rua are at? And good afternoon and welcome to our meeting of the Entertainment and Facilities Committee. I am joined by council members Mr. Rue, Mr. Alfaro, and Mr. Joe Buscaino. Madam Clerk, unless there's any objection, I'd like to take item 1 and 3 on consent.
No objection.
Thank you very much. So we'll do that. And can we start with item number 2? Can you please read the item into the record?
The Municipal Facilities Committee has submitted a report relative to a proposed increase of $3.4 million in the contract ceiling with CBRE Incorporated. This is for project management oversight of the restacking project at 201 North Figueroa Street, and it will be to proceed with phases 2 and 3A.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Melody McCormick with the Department of General Services. So phase 2 of our 5-phase project is for the 5th floor of the 201 tower, and that would be for the Development Services Center, which will house 120 staff from LA Building and Safety, Planning, and the Department of Transportation, and it will be a permit approval location. Phase 3A, we've split those phases into 2, will be for relocating the LAPD force and ombudsman groups to the 6th floor of the 201 tower. Both phases that we are requesting approval for today will be coming in at approximately $3.4 million. $2 million of that will be covered by the LADBS Enterprise Fund for the 5th floor. Planning will also cover $300,000 of those costs. And then for the 6th floor, that is also being funded by the MICLA funding that's available for space optimization that was set aside for these projects in anticipation of the DA moving out. So we're requesting authority to go forward with these next 2 phases, and I'll be back next month, hopefully, with the second to last phase of the project.
And is the $2.3 million, is that the correct budget amount for phase 2, or do you anticipate an additional increase?
We're still actualizing costs. The LADBS and planning and DOT floor was originally estimated at 2.7, but we have construction costs coming in, and so we believe that it will probably come in at 2.3. If there's any additional costs for that project, we will go back to Building and Safety and the Planning Department for them. As for the LAPD floor, we are fairly certain that they're going to take the suite as is, and that's going to reduce TI costs. So we're hopefully expecting that $1.1 million will also drop.
Okay, great. Members, any questions on item 2? Okay, seeing none. If there are no objections, I'd like to move item 2.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. Madam Clerk, let's go on to item 4.
For item 4, the City Administrative Officer has submitted a report. This has to do with a request for retroactive authority for submission of a $20,000 bid and acquisition of the Dolby Theater property from the Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles, a designated local authority.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Josh Romer from the Office of the City Administrative Officer. The city financed the construction of the Dolby Theater in 1999 by issuing $43 million in exempt bonds. taxable bonds. The approval and the issuance of the bonds was predicated on the property being owned by a public agency. That public agency was the Community Redevelopment Agency. Now that the redevelopment agency has been dissolved, the CRA must sell all of its property and all of its property interests. Recently, they offered dozens of their properties up for sale for purchase bids on an online auction. The Dolby Theater parcel is one of those properties. It is the city's belief that the property must remain owned by a public agency pursuant to our financing documents as well as agreements that the CRA is a party to. So we made our case to CRA with a request that they pull this property off their parcel of properties that were going to be sold. Nearing the September 29th deadline to submit a bid, about the week before, it became apparent to us that CRA was not going to pull this off their list of properties for sale. So we felt like the city was in potential of being in default on the bonds that it had already issued. So the city submitted a bid for the property. We submitted a purchase offer for $20,000 plus various closing fees. It will be less than $25,000 total, which is within our contractual authority. The bid was submitted with a letter clarifying the city's assertion that the CRA cannot sell the property to a private entity and should sell to the city. The current recommendations before you are for council to retroactively authorize the submission of the bid and also grant the General Services Department and the city attorney the authority to draft the necessary documents to complete the transaction if we're selected as the eventual bidder of the property. So acquisition of the theater will avoid the potential exposure to the city to claims that our payments, as we pay off the remaining $31 million on this loan, are no longer lease payments, but rather gifts of public funds. This is a concern that the city's bond council has made very clear to us. Acquisition of the theater will also allow us to avoid a potential default that is considered a material event that we would have to disclose to the investors and to the public, potentially affecting the costs of issuing debt in the future. And finally, the city, if it is able to retain ownership of the fee property, we'll be able to refinance the debt we have on it and save $7 million in present value costs over the $15 million, or over the next 15 years that we'd be paying off the bonds.
I have two questions. Why was the city's request to remove the Dolby Theater from the sales list by the CRA? What was the reason?
Why was it declined by the CRA? I can't exactly speak to that. I mean, we've generally, obviously we've worked together as sister public agencies for many times, and we have separate interests at this point. We're still working together with CRA on many issues that we get resolved amicably. For some reason, this is one where the CRA did not feel that it had the leeway of removing the property from their list of properties. They have a different MO these days. Like the state tells them that it's their job basically to sell off all their properties, maximize the value, and distribute those funds to the taxing entities, of which we are one. So in some respects, we're glad the CRA is proceeding with winding down to the best of its abilities. Ideally, they would have consented. I think it makes things potentially very complicated for the city and for the CRA if this property would get sold to a private entity. Right. It's not clear exactly what the ramifications are, but it's potentially very bad for the city.
Are there any other facilities in that same category situation where the CRA doesn't see eye to eye and isn't removing it from the
This is relatively
sales
unique.
list?
I mean, this is a very unique property to begin with, and the city and CRA worked very closely for years to figure out the dissolution legislation required CRA to put properties in various categories, and we worked very closely with them to try and get things in the right categories. This is one that slipped away. It's just a big one.
And my final question is: will the city's purchasing of the Dolby Theater interrupt the current operation?
No. So the Dolby Theater is currently, there's actually 7 agreements. There's lease, sublease, sublease, sublease. The resulting lessee is CIM that operates the Dolby Theater pursuant to a 99-year ground lease, and that all remains in place. Okay. So nothing will change in terms of the operation. This is really more of a cleaning up paperwork that was not perfectly drafted in 1999.
Great. Members, any other questions? Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you. I have a question. So we approve this and we move forward with a $20,000 bid. What happens if that
If we're not selected as the bidder?
Yes, or what if they take us on and they sort of close the door on what we're trying to do here? What are our options?
Natalie Brill, CIO's office. Sorry, we're in another committee this afternoon with Councilman Corian. We currently have outstanding bonds, MICLA bonds, on the Dolby Theater, which we issued in 1998 when we did that project. So one of the problems that we're having is what happens when one of our programs, which is built on somebody else's land, is sold. The theater was found to be a public necessity, and unfortunately, it's unclear to us if this property is sold from under us, whether or not the bonds would go into default. And what that means, we don't even know what that means. Does it mean that we can't pay the debt? Does it mean that we have to report that for the next 5 years? It's unclear because this has never happened before. The level of law involved in this is very unclear, and on top of that, the city attorney is conflicted out. So we have talked to bond counsel since about March. We have outside counsel working on it. Obviously, my concern on the bond side is that somebody will sue us and say, your bonds are now illegal because the property underneath it has now been sold to a private party, and that's the risk. You know, it's not so much that we believe the bonds will go in default, but somebody will challenge us. A bondholder will come forward and say, hey, you can't be doing this. And, you know, that's why we put in the bid. We want to be chosen as the property owner.
Did we request of the dissolution committee, for lack of a better term, did we request not to be on the list, but they put us on the list anyway? Is that what we're talking about here?
They were always on the list.
We're
trying to get you off, trying to get it
No,
off
but-
the list.
but you
You mean
mentioned,
what, the property was on the list for sale?
right,
Yeah.
because you mentioned that,
This is a challenging one. Truth be told, neither the CRA nor the city knew that CRA owned the property until the day before it went to their governing board. So it was a last minute, we had to decide, the CRA had to decide which list, which category of properties does this fall into. It had one evening of vetting and ended up on the list of for sale properties. Since that time, we've tried to engage them and make the case for why we think it does not belong on that list and have it moved somewhere else, or still have it for sale, but have it for sale only to the city.
right,
as
but
the
they've
owner.
refused.
Yes.
correct. We saw the list, like Josh said. It occurred to somebody to let us see the list of what was on there. And so the day before, Josh said, you know, you should look at this list and see if any of the lists are MICLA property, right? And so we took a list. Wait a minute, this is the Dolby Theater. So we immediately went to the CRA and say, hey, you know, we have bonds outstanding on this theater. Move it from the list, from the sale list, move it over to the list that it should be, what is it called, government?
Government use, or continue to be on the for sale list, but with the city as the only potential purchaser. There are other properties that are in that category where they are for sale properties, but they can only be sold to somebody that has a right of first refusal pursuant to a ground lease. So that was a scenario that we proposed, and we were not able to get this moved from this category from CRA.
This was a very complicated deal. I mean, not to, you know, belittle any of the staff, but this is a very complicated deal. There's like 2 or 3 leases involved here. So, you know, I want to be clear that we've been working on this since March. When we once discovered that there was an issue, we right away went to bond counsel, we went to city attorney's office, we tried to work with the CRA on what we needed to do. And I think that the resolution was that CRA wanted us to put in a bid. Like I said, we have still a lot of unanswered questions, unfortunately, because this is such a complicated deal and there's so many documents involved.
And what will this action, technically, what will this action do? Will it give us the level of protection that we're looking for? As far as giving us the option to acquire it as you've laid out, or?
Yeah, so this action of council would grant GSD and the city attorney all the authorities they need to actually complete the transaction. We've submitted a bid under what we believe we could do under our contractual authority, but we need to make sure that it's very clear that we have the right to continue through. It's going to be a relatively quick process with CRA. They're meant to make decisions on who the selected bidders are within a week, and we will have approximately a month to close after that, so this will be resolved by the end of the year.
Okay, so this
according to
asserts that
CRA's
right,
schedule.
this action. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Wu?
If the Dolby Theater was taken off the list when it was requested, wouldn't it have just reverted directly to the city?
No. Unfortunately, back in 1999 when these were drafted, I think the presumption is on any property that the CRA or that the city is issuing financing, you would assume that we would have some sort of rights for the property to revert to us at the end of the financing term. That wasn't the case on these. I think that we thought we'd always be working together with the CRA as a sister agency. So no, if it did not go on any list, or let's say the CRA, if they pulled it off the list, they'd have to dispose of it at some point. If they never did dispose of it, it would eventually escheat to the state, but I think not until maybe the mid-2030s, because that's when all the CRA's bonds are completely paid off. So it would continue to be in limbo. That's actually a limbo that would be okay for us, because the state is also a public agency. But by keeping it on the list, we have the very real prospect that a private entity would offer to buy the property.
So if it was in limbo, I mean, it could have actually been deeded to the city or sold to the city or...
Yeah, limbo would have served our interests. And we could also continue to let it be on a for sale list, but just assert that we are the only potential buyer.
Right.
And come up with an appropriate appraised value. It's a very confusing parcel to think about what the value is. We could have done that. We made all those proposals to CRA, and we just weren't able to move it off their list.
So the now that we put in a bid for $20,000, who decides on...
The CRA gets to make a decision, and CRA staff proposes to a governing board. They're not constrained to sell to the highest bidder. So I would not be surprised if our bid for $20,000 is lower than potentially a private bid, but our bid comes with the assurance that there are no legal complications. So that is my hope, and that's the argument we asserted to CRA.
Based on what Councilmember O'Farrell was asking, so if for some reason they don't accept our bid, is the CRA or the governing board or anyone else liable? Because obviously we are because of the bond. Would they be liable at all? Or any penalties or...
The CRA is not a party to the
unclear.
financing, so
Right.
I mean, as Natalie mentioned, we're still having outside counsel and bond counsel really piece through what the ramifications are. We don't have the answers. In short, initially we know CRA is not a party to the financing, so they don't necessarily care if we default or not. So we really need to have the proactive role here to try and just address the legal issues up front.
Do they now understand the situation?
I believe so. I think it's been clearly articulated to them.
Yeah, we have been talking to them, and there's been a series of emails between our bond counsel and their attorneys, and which is what's led to us to put the bid in. There also was a letter written to them explaining the city's position from a legal point of view between bond counsel and outside counsel, since city attorneys conflicted out. So they're well aware that if the property is sold to a private party, it could complicate our bond deal.
So, last question. So why do we offer $20,000? Couldn't we just offer $1?
It's a negotiation, I guess. We didn't want to have a bid that looked like we didn't want to issue a bid that made it very easy to decline, because the CRA, it's at their discretion who they sell it to. We wanted to issue a reasonable amount that was within our contractual authority. And by the way, we get 27% of that back as a taxing entity, so it actually ends up being to the net to the general fund a little bit less than $20,000.
We were trying to be, cooperative and
It's a
not
good
be
faith effort.
insulting, to the CRA, and to try to, be amicable and participate in their process, because they had set the rules out. And it is within our contracting authority, right? We couldn't do $1 million, right? But 20,000 was within our contracting authority as a city department.
And it's staff's assumption that there is a private bidder, that there's going to be a private bidder that most likely could bid.
But it's worth a lot more than $20,000, right?
It's actually very difficult to tell. It was a $43 million project when it was
It's now
built.
the Kodak Theater.
It is.
It's now where the Oscars are held.
Right, it
So-
was the Kodak, but,
It is
it was
the
taken
Kodak.
over by Dolby.
Because
But it's ground lease for 99 years at $1 a year. So there's no extra revenue to be squeezed out of this property. I mean, the only value for a potential bidder is that whatever they bid now, in 2098, they receive this theater property and the improvements entirely.
Because I would
your lease.
Because I would assume whether it's $20,000 or $1, I mean, it's way. I mean, I don't know if I could say it's undervalued, but
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah, the
it's
appraisal.
the heart of Hollywood.
Well, but you can't do anything with the property. I'm sorry. You can't do anything with the property because it's constrained by the 99-year lease and the bonds. So we think, right? So that's why we think that whatever the appraised value was, didn't take it into consideration the fact that it is constrained. You can't just tear it down and do whatever you want with it.
Any other questions, members? Mr. Kapoor?
Yeah, one of the recommendations is to request the city attorney to draft the ordinance as necessary. If the city attorney is conflicted, in advising us on this? Is the city attorney also conflicted in drafting an ordinance that's central to this transaction?
It's not entirely clear yet, but we have a route forward either way. My hope and assumption is that moving away from this being a bid scenario, where I understand why the city attorneys are conflicted out because they represented CRA back then in 1999.
Right.
When it's just the matter of drafting a purchase document, I think that it's possible the city attorney might be able to weigh in on this. If not, we have outside counsel that we've retained for just these matters, and they have in the past received grant deeds when we've received other batches of CRA properties, and so that's entirely acceptable.
So because this seems to be moving extremely fast, and you're having even to get retroactive approval of it, I'm a little concerned that we have a strategy laid out here, but the dynamics of the strategy might change in a few days or in a week, and I want to make sure you have enough authority to be able to address changes while still allowing the council to retain oversight on this. I don't want to put all of our eggs in the one basket of, well, let's do this. If something is going to change and you need to think on your feet.
I think I'm not going to answer for Josh here, but I think that it's difficult because we don't know what the CRA is going to do, and that's part of our problem. But I think that the direction we're going in, based on the emails that we have between the CRA and ourselves, I think we have to move in that direction because that's the direction CRA is setting us into. I think the decision point, once we know what the CRA decides to do, you're right, we may have to come back and say, okay, this is what the CRA said to us, this is what they're doing, here's a recommendation for what we need to do next.
As long as you have time to do that, fine. I mean, I'm fully supportive of what you want to do here. I just want to make sure that we're not putting you in a position where if there's some need for action and we don't have time to consider it, we lose the opportunity. So
it's a good question. I think the only additional leeway that we could be considering here, and I'm not necessarily recommending this, is authority. I mean, our contractual authority is under $25,000. If we felt we could be asking for additional authority to put in a higher bid.
you could go up to 24.5 if you want.
That's very, So I hesitate to recommend that because to some degree we're bidding against ourselves because we're not competing on price here. We're competing on
Obviously.
a nominal amount, a fair amount that is legally uncomplicated. So given that we know there's another bidder out there, we do know there was another bid submitted because we received notification of that from CRA.
Do we know who it is?
We presume that the most logical bidder would be CIM, the developer that owns the Hollywood and Highland complex. I don't know who else would have any value for the property.
I don't want to ask you any questions about this in a public meeting, but given how things are happening really fast here, my suggestion would be that you might want to talk to council about seeking injunctive relief against the CRA. Don't answer because it's a litigation strategy thing, but I think it's important that we get some time to actually think this through and deal with them in an effective way and not have, be under the gun like this. And it seems to me that we have a pretty darn good argument given the legal gray areas, the, impact on our bond financing and everything. It just seems to me that everybody ought to just say, there's no rush. Let's stop for a minute and deal with it in a thoughtful way.
Well, I will answer the fact that we have talked to the attorneys. We have been in discussion with the attorneys since March, I believe.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking you not to answer is because I don't want you to tell us what your
No,
discussions
I'm not telling you.
with the
I'm just saying
attorneys.
that we have authority to deal with the attorneys, if that's what you're asking me. We do have that authority. I think that's really all we need right now. I think this is such a different type of issue for us that I don't think Josh or I have dealt with before, or even our attorneys have dealt with before. That we're trying to do the best we can with the knowledge that we have, and this is where it's gotten us to.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Madam Chair, just real quickly to Mr. Krikorian's point, if this is Plan A, and we hope it works, I think we would love to have a Plan B, and that might be asserting some sort of jurisdiction over the proceedings so that we don't fumble away the Dolby Theater to an outside bidder.
Okay, if there's no objection, I'd like to move.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
Should we, based on these concerns, should we just continue it for a week or two, or keep it open, or keep it in committee?
I think you guys need
They
to
might be
move
trying to-
forward.
we need-
Time is
yeah.
of the
I think we
essence.
need to
We need
move
to
it.
I would
move
ask
this
to be able to resolve for the council authority as soon as possible. Just
If you would like to have a closed session item on this later, Councilman, we'd be more than happy to bring the attorneys in and discuss that with you if you feel that you need that.
Council yet?
No.
So, if you feel that you want to do that, talk to the attorneys in closed session, that's your other option.
You can bring up the injunctive relief.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so we'll do that,
Good
but let's
idea.
go ahead with seeing no objection, we'd like to move item 4.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good luck. Okay, Madam Clerk,
Item 5.
let's go to item 5, and I do have speaker cards for that. But why don't we get a report from the department and then get some questions answered from committee, then we can take the cards. Good afternoon.
Okay, for item 5, the Bureau of Contract Administration is here, and it has to do with an implementation plan and resource requirements for an Office of Labor Standards to enforce the minimum wage and address wage theft. This item is also referred to Personnel and Welfare Committee.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. John Reamer, the Director of the Bureau of Contract Administration. It's indeed a privilege to be here and to begin the discussions with respect to minimum wage implementation and the Office of Wage Enforcement, wage standards, and that's a conversation in and of itself. What I'd like to do is walk you through a report that we submitted in June that gave a glimpse of what we envisioned the path we would travel to administer and enforce the minimum wage ordinance and address the issue of wage theft. In that report, we laid out for you the partners that we spent time having conversation and dialogue. For us, the goal was to break our efforts into 4 areas: 1, informing the community in taking concerns; 3, investigating complaints; and then 4th would be to implement corrective actions. The staff that we identified that we would need, and this is in partnership with the Office of the City Attorney, was 39 positions. And our first attempt was to spread this over 4 years. What we asked for in the report was for you to consider the strategy, if you will, and in concept authorize that path of travel. The report did have an ask or request for staff positions, 1 additional for our Bureau of Contract Administration and 2 for the Office of the City Attorney, which we can address. In the budget year that we're currently in, we did receive, and we thank the council for that, 5 positions. 1 to serve as a lead for the office, and 4 what would be considered investigative positions. We've filled 2 of those positions, and we're moving forward in carrying out our phase 1, if you will, which is our information and outreach. We have accomplished thus far frequently asked questions that we've had vetted, approved by the Office of City Attorney, and we've posted on our website. We've established a 1-844, no longer 1-800. I guess they ran out, but a 1-844 wages FIA number that we will use for individuals to call in and give their concerns, ask questions, complaints. We're working on an RFQ that we will speak to also, and we're trying to process how we will communicate with businesses through mailings and notifications, the fact that on July 2016, the ordinance goes into effect. In addition to the 5 positions that we were provided in the budget, we were also given $200,000 for the purposes of outreach. What has been passed out to you just now is a revision to our efforts based on our examining what the workload may entail, conversations, further exploring the minimum wage and the wage theft. And what we are doing is asking for, once again, consideration, not a change of the number, but a, if you will, reorganizing of where the positions come. Whereas we asked in the original report for the positions to be spread out over 4 years, now we're asking in our Bureau of Contract Administration for these positions to be spread over 3 years. We're asking in this current report for a restructuring in the sense of changing some of the positions. One of the positions we're asking for is a senior MA2 in lieu of a CCPM1 contract compliance program manager. Number of reasons. One, to avoid the delay in waiting for that position to be approved, and then the competitive process from the standpoint of having the position advertised through personnel. There's currently a senior management analyst list now, and we believe we would be able to achieve some of the same things. Another request is going to be for 2 exempt positions that would afford us access to an expertise that does not currently exist in the city family, be it in our department or other departments. We're asking for an increase in the outreach package. Currently, we were authorized $200,000. In the initial implementation package that I gave you, the request was $200,000 plus $700,000 per year over 3 years. The $700,000 to be utilized for an RFQ to partner with community-based organizations to assist in outreach, implementation, interpretation services. We believe that needs to be increased to $1 million for the contract with the community-based organizations. We are comfortable with the $200,000 for the outreach. So those are the areas that are in the report that you just received. The majority of these items will be handled during budget discussions, so there's not much for you to do today other than give me feedback on what you see here, any concerns that you might have, any thoughts that you might have, questions, pathway that we're traveling, just to make sure, A, we're on the same page going down the path that fits the intent of the ordinance when it came out of council, and B, to, again, shore up what we believe is a sound approach to dealing with minimum wage enforcement and what we're going to ultimately ask for the office to be known as the Office of Wage Standards.
Okay, so you just submitted a revised report.
I did.
And so if I can, so what you're asking for is now to spread the 39 positions over 3 years instead of 4.
Yes.
You're asking to restructure some of the positions, and you mentioned a couple of them.
Yes.
The 2 exempt positions that you speak about, and you're saying that there's a level of expertise that you don't have in the department. What would those be?
With respect to labor law, in this particular area, I mean, it's what we don't know that we have some concern, and
So would these be attorneys or?
not necessarily. We not necessarily attorneys, because we believe very strongly in the Office of the City Attorney. We have a great partnership. More from the standpoint of just the implementation with respect to minimum wage itself. We're still having conversations with the Office of the City Attorney with respect to how far will our Office of Wage Standards go. What will be the parameters in which we can cover. So these would be individuals that would give us greater flexibility, if you will, with respect to minimum wage in the state of California and labor law. Now, granted, we believe that because we are the city's labor compliance officer, we're fairly well-versed in prevailing wage and labor issues. But minimum wage from the standpoint of the various sectors that we're going to be dealing with, issues such as meal breaks, is that something we are or not going to cover? Restaurants, just many nuances that exist with respect to the various sectors. We believe there's some individuals out there that may be equipped to facilitate us handling these things in an efficient way. And your authorization, it gives us the option to utilize that if we believe we need it.
And then the last thing you mentioned is, so you were allocated $200,000 to begin the outreach efforts?
Yes,
So you want, and you, an additional $700,000 per year for the next 3 years, and you want to up that to $1 million?
I do. I do. In the report that I gave you today, it's also asking for consideration for the tail end of the quarter of this fiscal year, $250,000. And that number is coming from the $1 million that we would envision utilizing for our contract with community-based organizations. We believe that it's prudent for us to get our RFQ out earlier than we had planned. Initially, the plan was to advertise the RFQ, establish a list of community-based organizations that we would be able to partner with, and begin that July 1st. We think it would be prudent to start much sooner than that. We're thinking the last quarter of this fiscal year, and that's what the 250 would be used for. The 200,000 that we have, we looked at mailings, and we received from the Office of Finance a database of roughly 450,000 businesses. At 50 cents a postcard, if that takes the $200,000 right there. So that's not necessarily going to work for us. We've reached out to the Office of Finance, we've reached out to Department of Public Works to inquire about possibly utilizing their mailings to put as an insert information with respect to the fact that minimum wage is coming. The goal initially was quarterly to communicate with businesses, as many as we could, the fact that this was coming. We believe the strength of this program will be to inform as often as we can, as many as we can. Part of our efforts have included not only meeting with community-based organizations that have a concern with respect to employees, but we've also had dialogue with some of the business improvement districts. We plan on having a workshop with the Office of the City Attorney, dealing with some of the business improvement districts and other businesses to make sure that the word gets out to as many businesses as possible. We're approaching this from this standpoint that many of the businesses want to do what's right. And we want to educate, inform, equip them to know exactly what's going to happen July 1st. Everything that we can do, we believe that will go a long way to make sure that the intent of the council is kept by the employees being compensated according to the time and the hours that they worked. There will be some, however, that will not. We've received from the community already numerous areas where wage step is currently taking place. I'd like to believe that come July 1st, hopefully before July 1st, that would change. But if it does not, we're looking at a workload come July 1st that will be pretty detailed. So we're trying to get a head start and not face an avalanche on the 1st of July.
Mm-hmm. Members, do you have any questions? Mr. Krikorian?
Well, mine are budgetary, and you mentioned that most of this will be considered as part of the budget process, but I note that these recommendations are not referred to Budget and Finance yet, and I'm wondering why.
The report did not have any ask other than the $250,000. The thought would be if we do not hire all of the authorized positions that we have now, and it's not for lack of trying, but it's for lack of not having a list, that there will be some salary savings that we may be able to use. So we would be making a request to redirect those monies and to utilize that. The initial implementation plan that spanned 4 years, we thought it prudent to align the request with the budget and finance process. It would give the city family more time to discuss it. So in this report that I just gave you today, there are no new positions that we're asking for at all. The authorization to utilize exempt positions would be for the 4 positions that we currently have. So instead of filling those, we would use those as exempt vehicles.
In this fiscal year.
In
The
this
current
fiscal
fiscal year.
year, in this fiscal year, yes.
Okay.
So that's the reason why. It's certainly, we certainly recognize the importance of coming before Budget and Finance, but it was just an attempt to give the city family as much time as we could through the normal process to
Great.
have these conversations and talk this through.
So you're bringing up these positions, but we have to make a decision to refer it back to Budget and Finance.
And the bigger thing was, we wanted everyone to get an idea of where this was going.
Yeah.
So, as often as we could, as early as we could, we wanted you to see, based on what we've seen and the expertise that we possess, we believe you're looking at a program that roughly 39 positions, and that's a far cry under what, proportionally speaking, San Francisco or Seattle have as 2 big cities that are in the process of doing minimum wage enforcement. That's the best guess, and I hesitate to use that word guess because it sounds so unprofessional, but that's the best number we can come up with now based on the data that we've seen and the evidence that is starting to slowly come in. I've been one, and our Bureau has been one, that we don't ask for if we don't need. And when we do ask for, if we find that once the decision has been made to authorize, we still don't need, we don't fill. So I just wanted you to get an idea of what we were seeing and where we were going. If this requires more conversations, I certainly want to have them so that you can hear more details if necessary about what's leading up to this. But again, we think the plan is pretty solid, and not to be repetitive, but breaking this approach down into information and outreach, that section is going to oversee the contract with the community-based organizations, investigation and complaints with respect to when the complaints come in. We'll vet them to see if they have merit. There will be some that won't. So we want to make sure that the complaints that come in, they are worthy of further investigation. And then the implementation and compliance, the ordinance calls for a hearing officer. We envision that there will be those that quite possibly will, they'll contest a determination that is made, and we will have to go through a hearing process. So we're going to have a group that is walled off, if you will, set apart from the core team to oversee any hearings that come through. Credibility is going to be the strength of this program. And in the discussions that I heard from council and all who came, council made it very clear that this is something that you want to have happen to ensure that workers receive what they should. Our approach to this is to make sure that businesses get a fair share and the employees get a fair share. And so this, we believe, is sound.
Well, I think you've done a very thoughtful job of creating an architecture for it, and I appreciate your coming and reporting on the general direction, because it could change a lot depending on the policy decisions we make in this committee
Most
and
certainly.
council. Your workload could be dramatically impacted depending on how we define this office, which really hasn't been completely done yet. I mean, you could probably fill your workload with these employees just on the wage stuff that's going on today in the city of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And then when you add to that the likely increase that will happen because of the minimum wage ordinance and its complexities, in fairness, not just because people are trying to, but because it's going to be hard for some businesses to figure out how to comply with it. And then if you add the scope even further to add other wage and hour violations and other kinds of employment law violations, then it's a qualitatively different office then, and you're going to have to come to us with an entirely different kind of architecture at that point. But those are decisions that we haven't really provided final direction on, I think, yet. So as an initial step, this is a really good outline, and I appreciate your comments about trying to be cost effective in the first year as we work the rest of it out.
Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Omer. I think that moving forward with this in April is about 1,000 times better than waiting until the beginning of the next fiscal year when the first increase rolls in all at the same time. I would hazard to guess that the vast majority of businesses are either partially aware or unaware that there's even a minimum wage increase calendar over the next several years coming in. So I like your emphasis on outreach, time and again, over and over and over again. I think it's imperative that every one of the 450,000 businesses that you mentioned does get an official notice on exactly what the minimum wage increase requires them to do. And then on top of that, continual outreach as the years advance. The community outreach contract that you mentioned, you're talking about bringing aboard some non-governmental organizations to help with that.
Yes.
Is there a short list of pre-approved organizations? I'd be very interested at some point, not right now,
Understood.
on hearing, maybe you come back to the committee and you talk more about that, but I think that's going to be important as well. And you mentioned the bids. The vast majority of businesses do not belong to, they're not in a business improvement district. I don't need to tell you this, but I just think that this incredibly complicated city we live in, we all want minimum wage to work. And we want it to be based on educating all employers on what they're legally responsible to do, as opposed to get into a situation where we're just going after all the bad ones, and that's our focus. I think that we ultimately want to make sure all employees, we fulfill the vision and intent of, what the minimum wage ordinance was, what we wanted to accomplish with that, and that is get as many people as possible into a decent wage and to help lift everyone out of poverty that we can. So I guess what I'm saying is a focus on education and outreach being the overriding goal, so that we don't get into a situation where businesses right and left are violating this.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just put that out there. And what's the 844 number again? What, 844?
It's 1844 Wages LA.
Wages LA. Okay, that's.
WAGES
When will that be live?
now.
It's live now.
You can call right now.
Okay, so that's a good thing to start publicizing. And also, recent state equal pay laws. Have you been anticipating how our minimum wage ordinance will sync up with recently enacted equal and fair pay laws?
It's a great question. We have been monitoring, and we're having discussions with the Office of City Attorney. What I can say is that we have what I would argue is a very strong relationship with the Labor Commissioner in her office. So our partnership will be critical. Working together, as Councilmember Krikorian alluded to, there's still discussions taking place as it relates to what our ordinance will ultimately look like. But I envision that we still will have scenarios where, when our ordinance is set, we will have violations of our ordinance, and that employer, more than likely, quite possibly, will have also violated state minimum wage requirements that we may not cover. And we've had the discussion. We've reached out to the Labor Commissioner, and we're partnering with them to work together so as to minimize and enhance, our being at the same place at the same time, and yet enhance our efforts to ensure that the message gets out and that issues are resolved as quickly as possible.
Okay. All right. Well, I look forward to hearing more about this as you will probably come back to this committee over the next several months. Thank you.
Mr. Wu?
Thank you. You have a massive job and undertaking ahead of you. Just want to commend you on that. Just had a couple of quick clarifying questions. So the revised is it 3.6 million in 3 years with the one-time 250,000 this year? Is that?
The revised, the 3.6 that you are quoting probably is...
$1 million a year and then
Yes.
$600,000 a year for advertising.
Right, exactly.
So 600,000, for the 3 years, that is.
Yes.
Will be for advertising, public relations, and technology. You also mentioned about and Councilmember O'Farrell was asking about the CBO outreach. Does that include possible contracting with them?
It does.
And do you have I know this is all a proposal and it's the current plan, but do you have a number figure for that?
No, we do not. What we would do is utilize whatever, I'll use the word allowance, we are given by council. We would use that to get as many services as we could, be it, again, interpretive services, assistance in outreach, believe it or not, unfortunately, collections from the standpoint of follow-through. Once a determination is made, if there is a hearing held and the hearing is resolved and there are no changes, we want to make sure that there's follow-up, that this doesn't just fall through a crack. So there are a number of things that we're going to place inside of the RFQ to establish a bench, if you will, of those experts in this area that can assist us where needed. And then we'll utilize them, again, as resources allow.
So it looks like you're going to probably use the CBO community for outreach and supportive services, like you
Yes.
stated. What about case management? Is that?
That will happen with city staff in conjunction with, city staff, Bureau of Contract Administration, and the Office of City Attorney.
Okay, but not, you're not looking into getting CBOs to assist?
Not necessarily. Historically, what we've done on our labor side, with respect to prevailing wage, we have what's called a joint labor compliance monitoring program, where once a year, we certify, for lack of a better word, industry experts. We take them through training. They're badged by us. And they have access to our projects where they're able to go out, interview workers, bring back information. So they'll go out, they'll do the outreach, they'll bring information back to us, but we're the ones that carry out the investigation and all that leads to any determination as it relates to whether or not a violation has indeed occurred.
And if there aren't any other questions from members, I can start taking public comment. We do that? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I have 1 minute on the clock, and Donnie Manzon? Is that right? Donnie Manzon? Donnie
Stepped up.
stepped out. Is nobody here by the last name Manzon? Oh, that's you. Okay. Sir, can you come up front? And I'm going to call the next speaker, Megan Ortiz. Is she here? Okay. Can you come and take a seat right next to Mr. Manzon? Sir, are you ready? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donnie Manson. I am an EMT, and I also work for a nonprofit called Filipino Worker Center. As an EMT, I work since 2009, and I also experienced wage theft. And the workers in these industries are not immigrants; they're citizens, born and raised here. So the perception of wage theft that it's exclusive to immigrant workers is not true. I'm just saying, okay? And please make a good budget for this office so that we can implement the wage theft. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Megan Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of Edepska. We operate 4 day labor centers in the city of Los Angeles. And I'm here specifically, obviously, in support of Mr. Reamer's proposal and what the BCA is moving forward with in terms of its plan, specifically in terms of community partnerships. As an organization that works with day laborers among the most vulnerable workers who experience wage theft in the city of Los Angeles, we are talking about workers who don't necessarily have English abilities. We are talking about workers who also don't necessarily have literacy abilities, including in their home language, which is why partnering with CBOs is going to be especially important as this office moves forward and opens up with its mandate. Additionally, the CBOs, many of which you will hear from today, have the experience of handling wage claims before on the state level, and we are confident that we'll be able to vet these claims and help make sure this office is as efficient as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Andreina Valguerrero. Is she here? Is that your first name, Andreina? And then the next speaker is Sophia Chang. Sophia Chang, are you here? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Andreina Baldenegro, and I'm a community organizer and coordinator for the Carecen Day Labor Center. And so I just wanted to touch on the point of why we need more investigators in this bureau. So LA is triple the size of San Francisco, which is a model that we've been using to model this bureau. And so which means we're going to need more investigators. And not only that, LA is, the epicenter of concentrated low-wage workers, and so which means that we're going to need more investigators to be out in the field, talk to the workers, and see what's going on. And an example of this is the day labor community, in which you might not have large cases of wage theft, but more of individualized cases of wage theft, where employers that are not paying, are unscrupulous, are not paying their workers, and so we're going to need to have investigators out in the field talking to different workers and coworkers as well to figure out what the situation is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophia Cheng. I'm with the Restaurant Opportunity Center and supporting the BCA's proposal on enforcement needs. The Federal Department of Labor and UCLA find that 8 in 10 LA restaurants violate basic wage and hour law. And when an industry has an 80% violation rate, that tells me two things. Number one, wage theft is the norm. It's not about people being malicious. It's just the norm. And secondly, responsible employers are being undercut. Rock does street outreach, and we also provide a weekly legal clinic for restaurant workers. I personally help workers prepare their wage claims. And when I say wage theft is the norm, what I mean is that I see many times workers, they know people aren't stupid. They know their rights are being violated, but too often people feel pressured to wait until they're injured, physically disabled, or fired to file their claims, because there's actually no expectation that you can actually work in a wage theft-free restaurant. Professor Janice Fine of Rutgers University is an expert on enforcement, and she says that partnerships with CBOs is important to, quote, reestablish a norm of compliance, specifically because we are really good at education outreach. That's what we do.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tia Nunes. I don't know if it's Tia or Pia. Tia. And then the next speaker after Tia is Rebecca Ronquillo.
That's me. She's sick.
That's you.
So I'm Rebecca, and Tia's sick, so I have her script in front of me. So
Okay, so you can only speak for one person. So which one are you speaking for, Tia?
Both,
Oh.
but I'll do it in my minute.
Great.
Can we start?
We start her.
Sorry.
I want to see you try to do this. All right. All right. Let's all.
Okay, hello.
Go.
My name is Rebecca Ronquillo. I'm a lead organizer with Kiwa, the Koreatown Immigrant Workers Alliance, and I'm also here to share some important information from Tia with the UCLA Labor Center, who is sick after working on SB 588. Woo! With that said, the UCLA Labor Center did discover that wage theft is widespread in all 26 low-wage industries throughout Los Angeles. Researchers in the research in the landmark 2010 wage theft survey published by the UCLA Labor Center were shocked to find the pervasive wage theft existence across all industries, 26 in total low-wage industries, which are as follows: bank tellers to car repair workers, car wash workers, childcare workers, teachers' aides, security guards, retail workers in department stores, clothing stores, office supply, residential, construction, parking garage, nursing, nannies, meat packing, warehouses, janitors, cleaners in buildings, hotel stores, amongst others. Kiwa has been doing wage claims for the last 22 years, and one of the issues which this ordinance covers is making sure that we collect. We always win, but we hardly ever collect.
Thank you very much. Good job. The next speaker is Eliseo Oliva, Rosemary Molina. You here? Hello.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Eliseo Oliva. Sorry, I'm going to have to read my ideas here. I am with Kiwa also, and I am here as a worker today to urge the Entertainment and Facilities Committee to make history with us by making sure we have a well-resourced bureau to ensure workers are no longer victims of wage theft. Community partnerships and enough investigators are needed to meet demands and a consistent outreach to workers. As far as budget need, as far as a budget need, what I do know is that 26.2 million are taken from workers every week. Last but not least, we are also need to be sure to expand as much as possible to cover overtime, break violations, misclassifications, minimum wage violations, and wage and hour violations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Rosemary Molina. I'm with the Clean Car Wash campaign. I work with car wash workers in Los Angeles. There are 10,000 workers here and about 500 car washes. That's a lot. We want to thank the BCA for a very thorough report. We agree with the report and support it. We need an adequately staffed and funded resourced agency. Just to give you a little scope about the car wash industry, it's entirely run and operated under wage theft. So even good, responsible owners have a hard time competing just because of operating standards. And we hope that this enforcement agency can help to fix that. We assisted 6 workers last year, just 6 workers from 4 car washes to file claims that totaled $197,000. That's money not going to their families, to their kids' mouths, to school. It's really unfortunate. And just one of those claims was for $105,000. And these claims can only go 3 years back. So it's really serious. That's in 1 year. In the same year, we helped workers collect $116,500. They waited 6 years to get that money. There's a 495-day wait right now to file a claim and get a hearing with the State Labor Commissioner. So this office is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Veronica Fedrovsky. Did I pronounce that correctly? And the next speaker after Ms. Fedrovsky is Tim Maddox. Are you here, Mr. Maddox? And after them, both of them speak. It's Trina Trailer and John Howland. Go ahead.
Well, hi, my name is Veronica Fedrovsky. I'm with the National Day Labor Organizing Network, and we organize day labor and domestic workers, and along with our member organizations in Los Angeles, Carson, and Edepska, we held a General Assembly of Day Laborers and Domestic Workers more than 6 years ago, where 250 workers identified wage theft and the main issue they wanted to work on. That's how we approached the UCLA Labor Center, then Council Member Correz, then Council Member Alarcon, and that's how this fight started. And then we approached the other industries for help. And now, 6 years later, still wage theft is still a huge issue for LA low-wage workers. So we really need your help making sure we have an operational bureau with, of course, community organization support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Maddox.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Tim Maddox, and I am Airport Industry Vice President for my local, SEIU, United Service Workers West. I would like to bring to your attention how important the Office of Labor Standards are for workers in Los Angeles, and how the office needs to have jurisdiction in all of Los Angeles. Currently, the office has the power to address wage theft in everywhere in the city except its city's own proprietary departments, LAX, the Department of Water and Power, and the Port of Los Angeles. These are huge departments that contract out billions of dollars worth of work. If the city is going to hold private businesses accountable, it should not leave out its own proprietary departments. Madam Chair, please request the proprietary departments to report on how they plan to engage the City Office of Labor Standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Trina Trailer?
Yes.
And then next speaker is John Howland, followed by Adina Tessler. Go ahead, Ms. Trailer.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Trina Trailer, and I am a member of the Los Angeles Black Workers Center. We support full resources of the Office of Labor Standards to ensure education outreach for workers and employers and strengthen civil rights enforcement for all workers. I am a recent UCLA graduate and a mother of a 26-year-old daughter, and we are both unemployed. My good work ethic and college degree aren't enough to break down systematic workplace violations. There is a black job crisis. When I look at construction sites and when I look at good paying jobs, it is like we're invisible. All workers, all families need to thrive. We hope to work on this together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Holland?
Good afternoon. I'm John Howland with the Central City Association. Let me begin by saying that deliberate wage theft is a crime, and CCA supports enforcing wage theft laws and holding accountable those people and businesses who steal from their employees. We and other groups have asked that before creating a new bureaucracy with punitive enforcement actions, you work with representatives of the business community. I'm pleased to say that we've met with Mr. Reamer from BCA about these enforcement policies. So, we need to make sure that employers who make legitimate mistakes should not bear the brunt of punitive laws aimed at egregious actions. A $100 per violation per day fine is punitive. Fines of up to $100 that are not mandatory but are based on intent and egregiousness are fair. This seems to be BCA's goal, but they will need enough funding to properly educate business owners about the new rules and responsibilities. As Mr. O'Farrell said, we need to help businesses, especially those small ones, be successful in implementing this minimum wage. And BCA's policies also need to be codified so that the next director cannot change programs to treat all business owners the same, regardless of their intent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Dina Tessler, representing the California Restaurant Association. We're here in support of moving forward with the wage theft enforcement and creation of the Office of Labor Standards. The SB 588 that was passed on the state, we worked with De Leon's office on that, and that also enhances enforcement and increases penalties, so we want to make sure that the two of them are working together, which I know was already brought up today. We want to thank Councilmember Martinez for her leadership in including the business community in this discussion. We did meet recently with the office in charge of this, and we told them, as we're telling you now, not to hesitate to call on the business community because so much of this is going to depend on education and outreach. The CRA alone has 2,000 members in California, 60% of which are in Southern California, and then there's many smaller family-owned restaurants that aren't members, but we know who they are. So if we can help you to get the word out to make sure that that everyone knows, even those people that don't have time to come to a meeting or be a member of an association, we're here to do that.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes public comment on item number 5. Are there any other questions, members? If not, if there are no objections, I'd like to move and approve the revised report submitted by the department. I've got two.
Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Deputy City Attorney Arletta Brimsey, just wanted to ask a point of clarification. Is the updated report intended to supplement the June 19th report?
That's my understanding. Yes.
I thought it replaced it.
Because the June 19th report has more substantive information in it, and it appears this focuses on just one aspect, the staffing, and then it proposes revised recommendations.
Okay, so why don't we just move to approve the June report? Well, can't we move to approve both?
Yes.
Yes. Then we'll do that.
But actually, the recommendations are in the latest report, right?
Yes, but the update has an update on the staffing portion of the June 19th report, so you need both.
Well, the June 19th report includes authorization of position authorities and fundings for the current budget year as well, and which are not contained in the October report.
Correct.
So that's...
So we can move to approve both.
Maybe Mr. Reamer
That's-
can add.
Mr. Rima?
I need to clarify, please.
This is what happens when you submit things
I know.
late.
It happens when you submit a report. I'm perfectly fine with you accepting both of them. The 19th report is more inclusive, and it clearly covers the depth and breadth of the program. The 13th, October 13th report, it supplements to add clarity to what we want to do with respect to moving positions around. That's why it doesn't address the 5 positions that we currently have in place now.
So, well, if that's the case, if we're moving both reports, then Madam Chair, I would ask that at least the June 19th
Budget and
report
Finance.
also be considered by Budget and Finance because it has a...
That's perfect. Perfect.
So in order to keep it simple, why don't we do both and have both considered by Budget and Finance
Excellent.
so that everything's going on the same track?
I like it.
Okay.
I like it. Great.
Great. I also have two requests, though. I'd like to request that the Office of Wage and Standards create an advisory council to include representatives from business, labor, and the CLA and CAO's office, and my office as well, that will meet quarterly to discuss some matters related to wage theft, enforcement, and implementation.
Okay.
And the second request would be that the pending CLA CAO report discussed above, that was requested back in June of 2015, upon the adoption of the minimum wage ordinance, be submitted in advance of the January 2016 committee meeting.
Okay.
All right. Seeing no objections, item passes. Thank you very much. Congratulations, everyone. Thank you for being here. Madam Clerk, there are no cards for general public comment, so this adjourns our meeting. Thank you very much.